Well, Cody, you've come out of the dungeon. You've reemerged with these scrolls that you're holding to combat the wicked um, tirade that Jordan Rodgers, the brother of the I think the estranged brother of Aaron Rodgers, went on last week about Arch Manning and his lack of pocket mobility, his lack of arm angles, all the rest of the stuff that I didn't really think made a lot of sense. But the one thing that everybody does say about Arch Manning that is hard to deny, and it's hard to deny for a lot of the best teams in the SEC this year, is that he doesn't have much experience. He started 2 games last season, played in how many? 12 over his career at Texas so far.
12.
12. And so, but it's not just Texas. At Georgia, you have Gunnar Stockton, who's inexperienced. At Ole Miss, all these Austin Simmons, you have Ty Simpson at Alabama. Even if you look at the other schools that are outside of the SEC, I mean, what do people really even know about like Julian Sane and all the rest of this, right? But as far as the SEC goes, it feels like the teams that are favored at the top of the conference are teams that aren't bringing back much experience with these quarterbacks, right? And that's something that I could technically agree with. What you went and did the research on is like, what does that even mean as far as the SEC? Historically, what has it meant to getting to an SEC championship game, to having that successful season? How has it been a prerequisite to be this super experienced type of quarterback?
Well, here's the thing. My end all be all, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to not be the most experienced. So before I even start everything, I'll just say this. This is an interesting stat. The 4 most veteran quarterbacks in the SEC going into the season. So the Pavias, the Zach Calzadas, your Taylor Greens, and your Blake Shapins from Vandy, Arkansas, Kentucky, Mississippi State. Those are the 4 projected bottom 4 teams in the conference, while Alabama, Georgia, and Texas are the favorites to win the conference, according to FanDuel, and they have 3 combined starts heading into the season.
I bet you Ole Miss has to be right there too.
Well, yeah. Well, Ole Miss, I think, is like 5th or 6th in the SEC, but it was just easiest because it was 1, 2, 3. It was like the 3 favorites off the rip and then the 4 bottom teams. Nonetheless, this whole thing comes about, and I will not be able to cover the whole thing in the show because it would take about a 2-hour show, but you go over to orangebloods.com, check out this column, and you can scroll all the way to the bottom if you really wish to skip through all the data. And I have a couple of columns kind of explaining my end-all be-all thoughts, but it came from the Jordan Rodgers tirade. And I'll be honest, this whole last weekend, Alex, I was just like stewing, whether I was cooking, I went out to the beach for a day, I was staying on the beach, and all I could think about was Jordan Rodgers and beating this thought into my head. Like we talked about last week, like people keep telling me that only four starters are back on defense, and now I'm believing it. And to me, it was like people are telling me experience matters, and I'm like, well, none of these guys are experienced, so it looks like none of these teams are going to win. And I was like, I gotta dig into this. So I went in and looked back at the last 10 SEC conference championship games by quarterback. So obviously last year was Quinn Ewers and Carson Beck. Then you go all the way back to 2015, which was Jake Coker at Alabama and Will Grier, who didn't actually make it to the SEC championship game. That was Treon Harris for Florida. Will Grier got suspended after week 6, but he did get counted in here because he was the starting quarterback in week 1 with 0 starts, 0 games, and 0 pass attempts. Without going through all that data, I'll just give you the averages to start the season. So all of this is based on the start of the season at which you made the conference championship in that situation. Stetson Bennett's obviously going to be on here a couple of times because he went to a couple of SEC championship games, but the average starts was 11 starts to make the SEC conference championship.
And this is last 10 years, right?
This is over the last 10 years. Yes. Since 2015 with Coker and Grier, 16 games played, 11 starts, and 270 career pass attempts. That's the average heading into a season at which a quarterback got to that point. 8 quarterbacks of the 22 ended up with fewer than 100 pass attempts, which is 36%. 10 of those 22 quarterbacks played 12 or fewer games, and 15 of the 22 quarterbacks that made the SEC championship played 10 or fewer starts going in, which 68%. 8 of those quarterbacks had fewer than 12 games played, 10 starts, and 100 pass attempts. And those 8 are Jalen Milroe and Carson Beck in 2023, Bryce Young, Tua, Jake Fromm, Jalen Hurts, all the notables, all the way down to the great Luke Del Rio and Will Grier in 2015 and 2016. 4 of those qualifiers lost in the national championship game that year. 3 of them lost in the SEC championship. The reason I walk through all of that is that there's 4 guys in the 2025 group that meet those criteria. Austin Simmons at Ole Miss, Ty Simpson at Alabama, Gunnar Stockton at Georgia, and Arch Manning at Texas. Now, why does all that matter? Because when you break it down, and I broke it down in 3 sectors here, and you can go look at it over in Orange Buds and digest it better, but I broke it into 3 sections, which is quarterbacks that had fewer than 10 starts, 12 games played, or 100 pass attempts, which is those quarterbacks I just mentioned. Quarterbacks that had more than 20 starts, 24 games, and 500 pass attempts, which you would basically, when you look at this group, that's the most experienced guys. That's Quinn Ewers, Jake Fromm, and Jaden Daniels, who all lost SEC championship games in that year, who all at one point were expected to be at this level, but didn't quite get there.
Jaden Daniels did.
Well, okay, but he stayed. So I wrote that up over in the column, but he did it in the 5th year, which is different than the other 2. Okay. The 5 guys in this group, 2025, that are in that is the Calzada, the Chapin, the Green, the Aguilar, and the Diego Pavia group. So it's not exactly the most telling or projecting outside of people can have their thoughts on Quinn. Quinn helped Texas get to this level, but the only one that really ever hit through the threshold was Jaden Daniels winning that Heisman Trophy. Fromm did win the SEC championship and I think a national championship his true freshman season. But again, he was in the midst of Georgia becoming what Georgia became. So that middle group of the most experienced, or the high end group with the most experience, not that telling. The interesting one was the middle group of the minutia, which is everybody that had played between 5 and 23 games, had more than 100 pass attempts. And that's where you get your Burrows, your Mac Joneses. Right now it's your DJ Lagways, your Jackson Arnolds, and things of this nature. But that's where you get 5 of your national champions, which is Stetson Bennett twice, Mac Jones, Joe Burrow, and Jake Coker. Jones and Coker each had 0 starts going into their seasons with just over 100 pass attempts. Burrow and Bennett, well, Bennett did it twice, but in Bennett's second season, he had over 400 pass attempts because of that first year. And I'll just say this without getting too deep into all the minutia is the 2 biggest takeaways I had here was it's interesting that LSU, who unlike Alabama and Georgia, so Alabama's played in 6 SEC championships the last 10 years. Georgia's played in 7. Florida's played in 3. LSU's played in 2. They've won on these runs with these quarterbacks. Joe Burrow, in his second season at LSU, wins the championship, national championship, and the Heisman. Jaden Daniels makes a run to the SEC championship, wins the Heisman in his second season at LSU. It's very interesting that there's one common piece at LSU right now. We talked about before we got on the show, but it's Steve Ensminger, who was a co-OC and quarterback coach while Burrow was there. He's still on staff, and I know that sounds who cares, but it's like sometimes things like that matter. You think back to like Tom Brady's quarterback coach during his career, and what was his Clyde Christensen? Like it was just some of those guys are very important to the maturation of quarterbacks. And while I don't love Garrett Nussmeier at this current stage, I think that this is a very interesting trend line, which is something I pay attention to in the sport of football, as everybody should. The thing I'll end on, and I'll ask you the question about, Alex, and I know I've went on a heater tirade right here, but when you look at the group of Manning, Simpson, Stockton, and I took out Simmons because Simmons was a 3 and 4 star out of high school, the difference is Bryce Young and Arch Manning, both consensus 5 stars. Tua Tagovailoa, Ty Simpson, Jake Fromm, all super blue chips, 4 and 5 stars. Hurts, Milroe, Carson Beck, and Gunnar Stockton, consensus 4 stars. If you're inexperienced, it doesn't matter in the SEC as long as you're a high-ranking recruit. And Arch Manning, Ty Simpson, and Gunnar Stockton meet those criteria right now. The thing that really caught me was the fact that you look at this whole group and then you look at Arch Manning and you hear everyone talking about the inexperience or what he can't do. How about what he can do? How about the fact that this guy's played in 12 games and has 95 pass attempts, and for the last 2 seasons sat behind a Quinn Ewers learning from a Steve Sarkisian, who, oh, by the way, was the offensive coordinator in 2020 for the Alabama Crimson Tide, with a quarterback named Mac Jones who had 0 starts and 154 pass attempts. And those 12 games and 95 pass attempts that Arch Manning had, all numbers that are greater than Jake Fromm, Jalen Hurts, Bryce Young, and Tua Tagovailoa, all guys from that group that won the SEC championship. They did lose the national championship, but they won the SEC championship.
Well, you didn't need me for this show, but it does what it what it does show is that, experience matters. Experience, it matters as far as a team level. It certainly matters as far as continuity within the team, all the rest of it. But I think from what Cody just said, it's like there's certain things that there's certain things just at the quarterback position. If you just look at the landscape of the SEC over the last 10 years, there are certain things that matter more than simple experience alone. And the type of experience that Arch Manning has had is unique in the world of college football right now, especially with the way that things are going with the transfer portal and NIL and all the rest of it. You don't get, like, what's to be said nowadays for 2 years of experience, just getting to watch and sit in the hip pocket of Quinn Ewers as he takes everything in from Coach Sark. So does experience matter? Ultimately, yes. In a lot of ways, it does. But when it comes down to it, it's like, it's more Jimmys and Joes than it is X's and O's.